Imagine a world where the boundaries between a charming television character and a real-life predator are completely obliterated. For more than 20 years, the global public was utterly mesmerized by an ideal model of masculinity in New York City. This was a man who wore premium bespoke suits, stepped out of luxurious limousines, held glasses of expensive scotch, and possessed a gaze that could effortlessly manipulate anyone standing in front of him. That man was Mr. Big, the iconic character from the hit television series Sex and the City, played by actor Chris Noth. For millions of viewers, especially within the world of romance media fans, Chris Noth was not merely an actor embodying a fictional role. He was the living realization of elite success, a symbol of upper-class masculine power, the ultimate alpha male whom every man desperately wanted to become and every woman deeply craved to possess. But behind the polished glass windows of the Manhattan skyscrapers and behind the magnificent red velvet curtains of Hollywood galas lay a completely different and terrifying reality. The true nature of that glamour was not romance, but a highly sophisticated and calculated system of psychological manipulation. Chris Noth did not just stop at acting on the television screen. He brought the entire colossal shadow of the Mr. Big character into his actual life, transforming it into a powerful weapon to establish his own private hunting ground. Throughout his 40-year career in the entertainment capital, this man operated a disgusting lifestyle right before the eyes of the public, yet he was protected by an absolute wall of silence from the powerful forces behind the scenes. Only when the masks finally fell at the end of 2021 did the world realize in horror that their pop culture god was actually an illusion built on dirty money, systematic complicity, and profound fear. Welcome back, where we dissect the darkest corners of the elite world and the principles of behavioral psychology. Today, we enter a chilling forensic autopsy of the spectacular downfall of Chris Noth. We will not just talk about simple accusations, but we will dive deep into analyzing how an individual can exploit toxic masculinity and media dominance to paralyze the ability of victims to resist. More importantly, we will expose Hollywood's multi-million-dollar complicity machine, the very people who knew the truth perfectly well, but chose absolute silence to protect the continuous flow of cash into their pockets, right up until the day they decided to hit the delete button on his existence when his profitability expired. To understand the core of this shocking scandal, we must first analyze the first chapter of the story, which is how the image of Mr. Big was commercialized and weaponized into a psychological manipulation tool in the real world. In the early years of the 2000s, Western pop culture was heavily dominated by the concept of the charming yet ruthless alpha male. Chris Noth's character of Mr. Big was the absolute pinnacle of that concept. He was a financial billionaire, a man who could disappear for months at a time, deeply wound the woman who loved him, but then reappear with a slight smirk and a single invitation to completely regain control of the entire situation. Hollywood systematically romanticized this toxic behavior, turning emotional control and psychological gaslighting into a symbol of mature attraction. Chris Noth understood the immense power this character granted him in real life, and he utilized it to its fullest extent. The manipulation algorithm of Chris Noth operated on a fundamental principle of psychology, which is the massive asymmetry of power and the blinding aura of celebrity status. Put yourself in the shoes of a young actress or a model who had just arrived in Hollywood during the 2000s. They were only in their early 20s, struggling to find even the smallest audition opportunities, and suddenly they were approached by Chris Noth. When he appeared, they did not see an ordinary middle-aged man. They saw the iconic Mr. Big in the flesh. Noth never approached his targets rudely or directly like a low-level predator. He always began with the flawless script of an elegant gentleman. He would discuss art, give them classic literature books, invite them to luxurious restaurants, or take them to exclusive nightclubs that he privately owned. This process is known as establishing trust through character assimilation. Noth made these young women believe that he genuinely saw their artistic potential, that he wanted to become a mentor, a launchpad for their careers in Manhattan. Toxic masculinity here was perfectly camouflaged under the guise of attentiveness and elite authority. When a man in Noth's position invites a young woman back to his private apartment to look over a new script or to taste a rare vintage wine, The balance of power has completely shifted to one side. The victim is entirely overwhelmed by the luxurious surroundings, by the dazzling aura of an A-list star, and they completely lose their basic defenses. However, the moment the apartment door closes, the entire elegant gentleman's script is violently torn apart. The mask drops to reveal a brutal and cold act of violation. Many victims later recalled a spine-chill detail, which was that during his despicable acts, Chris Noth maintained an arrogant attitude. Exactly like the way the character of Mr. Big dominated the screen. The psychological collapse of the victim occurs at that exact moment, when they realize the man they once admired is actually a heartless predator. The even more terrifying part happens after the act concludes. Noth shows no panic or anxiety whatsoever. He coldly puts back on his bespoke suit, fixes his hair, looks directly into the victim's eyes through the mirror, and delivers implicit warnings. He does not need to use physical threats. He simply uses the weight of his own name to paralyze their will. Who would ever believe the word of an anonymous girl, a hotel maid, or a background actress, when the man they are accusing is the cultural icon of an entire generation, the most powerful man on the HBO television network? This is psychological manipulation at its highest level, where the perpetrator turns his own fame into an impenetrable fortress. Moving into the second chapter, we must face the reality that no individual, no matter how cunning, can hide such crimes for 40 years without the assistance of a massive complicity system. Hollywood is not a pure sanctuary of art. It is a business engine built to maximize corporate profit. And within that engine, the image of Chris Noth as Mr. Big was a golden goose. His toxic masculinity was not just a personality trait, it was a commercial product worth hundreds of millions of dollars, bringing record viewership to networks and massive cash flows to entertainment conglomerates. To protect this cash flow, a dark shadow network was established to clean up every single stain that Chris Noth left behind on his predatory path. This complicity network included top-tier talent agencies, powerful Hollywood lawyers, and even influential tabloid media outlets. When a victim intended to speak out or seek help from their own managers, they immediately crashed into a terrifying wall of silence. Instead of receiving protection or justice, the young women were always given warnings disguised as professional advice. They were told that confronting Chris Noth would mean absolute career suicide. Their names would be blacklisted by every major studio, they would never get another acting role, and their lives would be completely ruined by prolonged lawsuits initiated by Noth's legal army. For more severe cases, when the risk of information leaking to the mainstream media became dangerously high, Hollywood's shadow cabinet would activate their financial crisis management protocols. Non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, were rapidly drafted by the sharpest legal minds. The victims were handed large financial settlements, but in exchange they had to sign a pledge of absolute permanent silence. If they broke the contract, they would face financial penalties that could completely bankrupt them. The silence of the Hollywood elite in this matter was absolutely not due to ignorance. They knew exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of Noth's nightclubs. They heard the rumors from the crew members on set, but for the executives, as long as Chris Noth remained a profitable asset, as long as the next chapters of Sex and the City kept driving new subscribers to streaming platforms, the pain of the victims was merely an acceptable operating cost that could be written off under the corporation's risk management budget. However, every power game in the elite world follows a brutal biological law, which is elimination once an asset loses its utility value. This brings us to the third chapter, the day the elite machine decided to hit the delete button on the outdated alpha male. In December 2021, the highly anticipated sequel series And Just Like That officially premiered. In the very first episode, Chris Noth's character of Mr. Big suffered a sudden death from a heart attack on a home exercise bike. It was a fictional death staged by writers to create a massive media shockwave for the show. But what no one expected, including Chris Noth himself, was that this on-screen death was a literal omen for his complete termination in the real world. Just days after the episode aired, the prestigious outlet The Hollywood Reporter dropped an exclusive investigative report containing detailed and heavy accusations from multiple women. These accusations were not just empty words. They came with specific timelines, conversations, and testimonies from witnesses who had seen the victims in states of panic years ago. This media nuclear bomb immediately shattered the illusion of the ultimate alpha male. And look at how the Hollywood system reacted to this crisis. It happened with the terrifying speed and coldness of a computer algorithm. There was no prolonged internal investigation to find the truth, no public statements of defense, and no calls for sympathy from longtime co-stars who had been raising toasts with him just days prior. In less than 48 hours, Chris Noth was fired immediately from the television series The Equalizer. The fitness company Peloton instantly pulled its expensive ad campaign featuring him. The final financial blow came when a premium tequila brand owned by Noth saw a $12 million acquisition deal completely cancelled by its corporate partner. This purging happened so fast, not because the Hollywood elite suddenly found their moral conscience after 40 years of complicity. The real reason was far more transactional. The moment the accusations were brought to light in an undeniable way, the image of the charming middle-aged man instantly transformed into a massive financial liability. In the world of entertainment capitalism, the greatest sin is not destroying someone else's life. The greatest sin is damaging the brand value and the cash flow of the corporation. When Chris Noth was no longer a profitable asset, he became a bad debt that had to be completely wiped from Hollywood's accounting ledger. They deleted Chris Noth from history just as ruthlessly as they had covered for him for decades. From a powerful god of Manhattan, the real-life Mr. Big stepped into an absolute void of complete isolation. Due to statute of limitations barriers, he might never wear a prison uniform, but he must serve a life sentence of total rejection from the very empire that created him. It is an intensely satirical ending for a man who spent his entire life thinking he was the apex predator, thinking he was an alpha male, holding the power of professional life and death over others, only to realize that he was just a disposable commodity, a pawn tossed into the garbage without hesitation by the true financial masters of the shadow world. To truly understand how a system of systemic sin can survive firmly across multiple decades, we cannot merely look at the isolated actions of a single individual, but we must dissect much deeper into what can be called the algorithmic machine of psychological manipulation. After establishing a flawless camouflage through the dazzling aura of the Mr. Big character, Chris Noth began to operate a calculated, highly repetitive predatory routine that was nothing short of terrifying. It was a deeply toxic dance where the self-esteem of the victim was methodically crushed to pieces long before they could even realize they were stepping into a fatal trap. When a young woman stepped into the private space of this powerful man, the first thing she had to confront was the classic psychological phenomenon of being completely overwhelmed by elite authority and upper-class power. Inside Noth's living room, everything was meticulously arranged to assert an unshakable status, ranging from personal photographs taken with top-tier global politicians, prestigious entertainment awards, to rare bottles of alcohol that cost more than an entire year of salary for an average working citizen. All of these details did not exist simply for aesthetic decoration. They were highly intentional visual tools engineered to send a silent but clear psychological message that the man standing before you held the absolute destiny of your professional career in the palm of his hand. The true cold-blooded cruelty of Chris Noth lay in his highly sophisticated application of psychological isolation techniques within those closed doors. The moment a victim began to sense that something was fundamentally wrong and tried to find a polite way to retreat, Noth would instantly shift his emotional frequency from a charming, elegant gentleman to an intimidating, aggressive superior. He did not need to deploy immediate physical violence, but instead used subtle, piercing verbal degradation to systematically lower the self-worth of his target. He would confidently tell them that they were overreacting, that they lacked the true star quality required for a major Hollywood career if they continued to display such foolish, childish shyness, or he would mock them by stating that their mere presence in his apartment was an elite privilege that thousands of other young women were desperately begging for. This precise technique forced the victim into a state of profound self-doubt, a textbook manifestation of severe gaslighting. They began to question whether they were misinterpreting the innocent intentions of a legendary industry mentor, And that exact hesitation of a few short seconds completely stripped away their final window of resistance. When the act of violation ultimately occurred, it was not merely an assault on a physical body. It was a hostile psychological takeover where the entire will of the victim was completely shattered by the colossal shadow of a pop culture titan. Yet, this dark forensic case study would be completely incomplete if we failed to expose the impenetrable fortress built of solid gold and the highly transactional silence of the Hollywood elite. Let us face the uncomfortable question of why the desperate cries of these victims could be extinguished so effortlessly for 40 long years. The answer lies within the multi-million-dollar corporate protection machine that stood behind Chris Noth. In the capital of entertainment capitalism, an A-list star never operates as an isolated entity. They are surrounded by a predatory pack of corporate vultures, including powerful talent managers, public relations spin doctors, and elite defense attorneys. For these entities, Chris Noth was a golden goose, a strategic financial asset that generated highly lucrative endorsement deals and massive viewership numbers for television networks. Therefore, whenever a major scandal threatened to erupt, this machine would immediately activate its crisis management protocol to protect the corporate cash flow at all costs. The most advanced weapon within the arsenal of this complicity network was the non-disclosure agreement, commonly known as the NDA, which functioned as a permanent legal gag order on the victims. When a young girl, in a state of absolute panic and profound trauma, attempted to seek external help or threatened to take the story to the press, she would not be met by a trembling Chris Noth, but instead by a cold wall of sung-sa lawyers dressed in black luxury suits. These legal mercenaries did not arrive to negotiate. They arrived to execute a brutal campaign of psychological and legal terror. They would lay out a massive, intimidating legal dossier in front of the victim, terrenely analyzing exactly how her life would be thoroughly ripped to pieces by the mainstream tabloid media if she dared to go to court. They threatened to excavate her entire personal past, defame her character in front of the global public, and transform her into a dynamic, gold-digging opportunist in the eyes of society. Once they had planted a sufficient amount of absolute terror, they would present the final transaction, a massive financial settlement. This sum of money could instantly solve the immediate financial struggles of an impoverished, aspiring actress. But it came with a strict covenant of permanent, absolute silence. That money was never compensation for human suffering. It was a commercial transaction to buy the absolute ownership of the victim's memory, converting a heinous crime into a legally binding business agreement protected by the state. What is even more sickening is the passive complicity of the wider Hollywood elite, who were completely guilty participants in this systemic cover-up. In the high society galas of Manhattan or the exclusive VIP lounges behind the scenes, the predatory behavior of Chris Noth was never a classified state secret. Executive producers knew it perfectly well, famous co-stars knew it, and the daily production crew knew it too. They witnessed him approaching young women in an aggressive, inappropriate manner, and they heard the quiet warnings whispered among background actresses to stay completely away from Noth's private trailer when the production lights went out. Yet every single one of them chose to look the other way. Why did they do it? Because within the toxic culture of elite vanity, maintaining a pristine relationship with an influential, high-ranking star always yielded far more professional benefits than standing up for an anonymous, powerless victim. Their silence was not accidental, it was a pure economic calculation. They understood that speaking out would disrupt a multi-million-dollar film project, anger corporate sponsors, and ultimately jeopardize their own positions of power. The Hollywood elite willingly volunteered to become the brick and mortar that built the protective wall around the predator, exchanging human justice for the continuous security of their own luxurious lifestyle. The toxic masculinity embodied by Chris Noth through the systematic assistance of the media was elevated into a form of public religion, where the global audience was thoroughly brainwashed to believe that arrogance and total control were the absolute pinnacle of male attraction. In the major magazines of that era, journalists continuously romanticized Noth's reckless lifestyle, transforming his high turnover of romantic partners and his wild nights at private clubs into glamorous folklore about a legendary Manhattan bachelor. The media created a protective filter that neutralized his real-life misconduct, reframing aggressive behavioral patterns as merely the eccentric personality of a brilliant artist, the untamed wilderness of a classic New York alpha male. This widespread social indulgence completely paralyzed the public's ability to recognize immediate danger, leaving the victims utterly isolated in their pursuit of justice, because they knew that by speaking out against Mr. Big, they were fighting against the collective fantasy of an entire generation of viewers. However, what Chris Noth completely failed to anticipate was that the exact same system that had protected his crimes for 40 years possessed a core nature that was infinitely more ruthless when the cultural tide turned. Hollywood is perfectly willing to harbor a predator, but they will never protect an outdated financial asset that threatens the ultimate survival of the elite class. When the global movement for female justice erupted with unstoppable momentum, the traditional scales of power began to exhibit severe structural fractures. Those fractures were initially very small, mere rumors circulating on obscure online forums, but they rapidly accumulated into a Category 5 media storm, waiting to completely erase those who believed they stood above human law. Chris Noth continued to walk confidently in his premium bespoke suits, completely oblivious to the fact that the cold algorithms of major entertainment conglomerates had already begun to quietly simulate the protocol for his total social termination, the exact moment the final investigative report hit the printing press. When the media storm officially made landfall in December 2021, the global entertainment ecosystem witnessed one of the most rapid, brutal, and historic downfalls of an established cultural sovereign in modern history. Within a few short hours after the comprehensive investigative report by The Hollywood Reporter hit the printing presses, the long-standing illusion of the omnipotent gentleman known as Mr. Big evaporated into thin air, exposing a raw, crumbling reality that was completely beyond any hope of salvation. What made this sudden ruin so terrifying was not merely the chillingly specific details provided by multiple victims who did not know each other, but the cold efficiency with which the corporate entertainment machine instantly activated its automated disposal protocols to protect its collective survival. The very executives who just yesterday were enthusiastically shaking Chris Noth's hand, and the multi-billion-dollar conglomerates that had used his majestic public persona to extract hundreds of millions in profit, suddenly became the first entities to push the button of total social liquidation, erasing him from the modern timeline without an ounce of hesitation. Let us dissect the mathematical ruthlessness demonstrated by television networks and production companies during those initial chaotic hours. The highly anticipated television blockbuster series, the high-budget sequel to Sex and the City, titled And Just Like That Ad, ironically just premiered its historic first episode featuring the shocking, heart-stopping death of the iconic Mr. Big character on screen. In a twist of dark coincidence, show's writers had unwittingly constructed a hauntingly prophetic metaphor for real-world events. However, while the fictional death on the silver screen was met with millions of genuine tears and deep nostalgia from a mourning global audience, the real-world death of Chris Noth's professional life was met with absolute isolation, cold disgust, and instant public exile. Home Box Office and its corporate production partners immediately issued a definitive decree to completely slice away and destroy every single frame of a high-profile flashback sequence featuring Noth that had been meticulously scheduled for the season finale. They were not merely editing a premium entertainment product, they were performing a calculated digital lobotomy, trying to forcefully scrub away every single trace of this man's biological and artistic existence from the collective consciousness of the viewers to prevent a total catastrophic collapse of their corporate stock value. The systematic execution of his public identity did not halt at the boundaries of the television studio, as the massive machinery of consumer capitalism continued to tighten its legal and financial noose around the neck of the fallen alpha male. Peloton, the premium home fitness conglomerate that had just debuted a massive viral ad campaign starring Chris Noth mere hours after that infamous premiere episode aired, found itself trapped inside a corporate PR nightmare of historic proportions. Within less than 24 hours, The executive board issued a panic command to completely scrub the multi-million-dollar advertisement from every corner of the internet and released frantic public statements stating they had absolutely no knowledge of his private history. Simultaneously, a highly lucrative $12 million business acquisition deal for Noth's premium artisanal tequila brand was instantly torn to pieces by his primary investment partners right on the negotiation table. His longtime top-tier talent management representatives and elite public relations architects, individuals who had previously collected millions in fees to protect and polish his public armor, suddenly lined up to sign immediate termination papers. Chris Noth transformed overnight into a toxic biohazard within the elite circles, a social pariah whose mere presence would bring instant reputational ruin to anyone desperate enough to stand by his side. This is where we must apply a forensic psychological lens to expose the ultimate anatomy of power within the elite echelons of Hollywood. The global entertainment system never punishes a high-profile predator out of genuine moral enlightenment or sudden empathy for broken human lives. They punish him exclusively because he committed the unpardonable sin of getting caught and disrupting the master cash flow of the collective industry. The moment the tidal wave of public fury and mainstream media outrage surpassed the point where it could be quietly neutralized by multi-million-dollar hush money payments or non-disclosure agreements, Chris Noth ceased to be an elite financial asset. He became a toxic corporate liability that required immediate, absolute liquidation. The collective silence that the industry had willingly maintained for 40 long years suddenly transformed into a hypocritical chorus of righteous public condemnation. Famous co-stars and high-level executives who had spent decades witnessing, joking about, or actively overlooking his aggressive, non-consensual behavioral patterns suddenly rushed to position themselves in front of news cameras to express their profound shock and immense sorrow, acting as though they had just awakened from a deep sleep and were completely oblivious to the rotting rot that had built the very foundations of their luxurious kingdom. Yet, the ultimate toll inflicted upon Chris Noth was not found within the destroyed legal contracts or the tens of millions of dollars that vanished from his bank account in a matter of days, but within the total, irreversible disintegration of his gargantuan, megalomaniacal ego. For a classic textbook narcissist who had dedicated his entire adult life to building and embodying the ultimate archetype of the untouchable upper-class male patriarch, being violently stripped of his social dominance and the collective adoration of the public was a psychological execution infinitely more painful than physical death. He was no longer the legendary ruler of Manhattan who could reduce a crowded room to silent awe with a single tilt of his head, no longer the universal standard of mature masculinity that every young woman fantasized about capturing. When he attempted to step onto the public streets of New York, this one-ship titan was forced to confront only the cold, avoiding gazes of passers, the hushed whispers of intense disgust, and the agonizing solitude of his own shadow stretching across the lonely pavements under the sterile glare of city lights. His artistic legacy, a monument he truly believed would be immortalized forever within the halls of pop culture, was now permanently nailed to the cross of historic public shame. The dramatic narrative of Chris Noth serves as a dark cautionary chapter within the wider forensic archive of elite institutional corruption. It tears down the glamorous velvet curtains to expose a terrifying truth that behind the bespoke luxury suits tailored from the finest fabrics on earth, and behind the dazzling magnetic smiles designed for the paparazzi cameras on the red carpet can lie an absolute vacuum of human morality and a calculating system of structural exploitation. This long-delayed indictment against an industry god is not merely a warning to all self-proclaimed alpha males who harbor the dangerous delusion that their wealth places them entirely above the boundaries of human law, but a total unmasking of a superficial culture that happily uses aesthetic elegance to camouflage human destruction. The spectacular collapse of the Mr. Big myth marks the definitive end of an era where silence could be bought and sold as a standard commodity, forcing us to finally accept the undeniable truth that within the corridors of absolute power, the only true shield against complete personal annihilation is not a fortress built of solid gold, but an unyielding preservation of basic human decency and respect for the absolute dignity of another human soul.